I'm Victoria. Hi. I'm going to chat a wee bit about CSS modules and how you can use them to scope your CSS. So just a little bit I'm going to run through. So just a quick bit about me. What are CSS modules? How do we use them? What about Sass? Just a tiny little bit about how you integrate them with Webpack compilers. And then just let's have a wee look at some code and hope that the demo gods are on my side today. So just a quick little bit about me. I'm a UX engineer at Rapid7. Who has ever heard of Rapid7? I don't know. But that's just a little bit about what I do. My day-to-day is consistent UI and experience for our customers and trying to uphold style and coding standards across the board. I guess that's the life of a UX engineer. I'm a graduate of interactive multimedia design. That course is now dead, RIP. I was a grad of class of 2020, but technically didn't graduate until this year because COVID, thank you very much. A few of the languages that I would put up there is Vanilla.js, which is my one true love, Sass, which has been a big part of my uni and career, React, which has been a big part of my career the last couple of years, and TypeScript, which is a skill that's currently loading up. And I guess let's just dive in. So according to the GitHub documentation, CSS modules compile to low-level interchange format called ICSS, or interpolated CSS, but are written like normal CSS files. So what does that mean? In a nutshell, CSS modules allow you to scope your CSS locally. So you can pull it right into your component. So say we take a React component like the card here, we can pull that right in and just use it directly in our component. So you can see here, we import styles from the card.module.css file. And then we can create class names, which are actually JS objects, which you can see here, which is styles.container. And then each class name is unique and is linked to those styles we have in our CSS file. So there's no need for global files anymore. So how do we use them? We can write our CSS just as normal. Just as they said, ICSS files are the exact same as CSS written. So in the top screenshot, you can see it's just a regular CSS file. There's nothing fancy or new about it. We add a .module before our CSS type. So we have card.module.css. And then we can import that straight into our file using an object name. So I've imported mine using the styles object name. You can use anything. You can use card styles, cards. Just obviously make sure that it's not gonna, like clash with any other style, like variable names that you have in your file. You can write your class names in 4 different ways. So you can have just styles.classname. As you can see here, we have styles.container. You can have styles.classname with camel case. The only thing with this is that if you have a camel case as your class name in your JS file, it has to be the exact same in your CSS file. So you would have to write camel case in your CSS, which I don't really like, but you can do it. Then we can also have class name with underscores, and then the one that I tend to use a lot, which is styles with the class name encapsulated in square brackets, which allow you to use kebab case, the BEM, the block element modifier structure, which I think a lot of people use in their Sass, and then also use actual variables such as like use state variables, and also any other ones that you have. So whenever we actually get into the browser, this is how it looks. So our generated class name is made up of 3 parts. So we have our module name, which is card. So this is whatever we call our file name. So we have card.module.css. So card is the module name. That's what we get at the start. It's essentially is kind of following the BEM structure slightly in that regard. Then we have our class name itself. So that's our container. And then we have a unique hash, which is that 9S59B. So even if we just had container with our hash after it, it means that we're always going to have a unique class name. They're never going to clash and they're never going to overlap with other components that we have. This basically means we could have a card that has a containing div, which could be called container. We could also have a button, which has a containing div called container. And we could have, a modal with a containing class called container. And because they're all locally scoped to their own components and have these unique hashes, they'll never override. So what about Sass? I don't know about anybody else here, but I haven't wrote an actual CSS file, like a proper file, in so long. Doing this demo for the screenshots was the first time I think I've wrote a proper CSS file in like 6 years. I always write Sass now. And when it comes to Sass, we can write it the exact same way. So we just do a .sass file instead of a .css file, CSS modules understands, and it lets us do that. Along with this, because Sass usually has their class names indented anyway, we can use a global selector. So we have global and local selectors in CSS modules. These allow us to either scope globally or locally, just as they say on the tin. When we use a global selector, we can actually take our containing div, which is our container. We can then put a global after it, and anything else in these little curly brackets after is all globally scoped, but to this technically locally scoped to this containing class. But it's global for the stuff inside, if that makes sense. It just means that we can actually put the styles.container on our containing class, and we don't have to put it on our header, our content, our footer, anything else inside that, but it's all still scoped to that one component in that one place. When it comes to the likes of theming, and we have, say, a day theme and a night theme, and those class names are above our component, because our component is now modularized and everything comes under that container umbrella, we can't access this variable, or we can't access this class name because it's above our component. What we can do then is we can wrap this in a global class, and it'll understand that, oh, hey, this is a global class name. I'll just allow you to use these variables. I'll allow you to use this these styles and put them wherever you need them to be. So this is how we use our global one. So we can either have it to create like this umbrella effect, or we can have it to look up or down. Just a really, really quick piece on Webpack and compilers. Whenever you're using CSS modules along with Webpack or say like a storybook config, you have to use the CSS loader. Within this, there's a simple and a more tailored option. Simple version is you just do options, modules, true, and it just allows you to use CSS modules. The more tailored option will ask you if you want to have a local or global mode by default. You can actually change up your class names that are generated. So here, this is the most basic one where you have your local, which is your class name itself, then whatever kind of hash you want. You can also put the module in there. So with this, you actually wouldn't get the module name of card before your class name. You would just get the class name and then the hash, which I think is a bit cleaner a lot of the time. And then this little auto true basically allows CSS modules in your project to understand if something has a .module on its file name, use CSS modules, cool. If it doesn't, just allow it to be global by default, which is an absolute godsend whenever you're pulling in other like Sass packages from other places and they're not CSS modularized. So let's have a quick look at some code, and hopefully this will actually go well for me. Let me just zoom out of the way again. Louise, just keep me on time because I'm not checking the timings at all. Okay, so we just have a simple card. As you can see, it's not really styled properly. We have a theme change here as well, but our card isn't changing theme. So if we have a look at the code, again, this zoom is really getting in the way. There we go, put it in the bottom. So we have a card here, button. If we look at our card, we can see that everything has a CSS module name. So we're pulling in from our card.module.sass file, and we're doing styles container, styles type, header, blah, blah, blah. Now, if we look at our card file, we can see we've got all of our stylings in, all of our colors, but our colors aren't coming through. And why is that? We go to our theme. You can see again, we have our themes, we have our map. We're saying, here's our colors for our day theme, here's our colors for our night theme. But again, it can't access this class name. So what we have to do is we have to say global, and then we pop the day theme inside that, and we do the same with the night theme. Just put there. We save this. Should now come through. Now we've got our header color, and if I change the theme, we've now got our theme and colors coming through. If I go back to the card module, so say I don't want to have all of these class names to be modularized. So if I come back to the card and I say, actually, let's just do the container and not have the styles the whole way down. So let's do this. So now we're not getting any styling again, because we only have the CSS module class name on our container, but nowhere else. So all these stylings aren't coming through. So if we go back into our card module, if we do global here and we say, okay, oh, I've spelled it out. If we say, let's have everything within these curly brackets to be global, what will happen is we'll get this error, this missing white space after global. And now I just realized that I think I actually skipped a part of my presentation, because I did have a slide to talk about this. So CSS modules don't like the and selector at all. It's really fiddly, it's really confusing, it's almost like it throws it for a loop. In SAS, this container and this success class are on the exact same line. So if I go back, we can see, well, I don't have the success on at the minute, but this success would go right here beside it. It doesn't understand, it doesn't like that. And we haven't scoped this. So what we actually need to do is, instead of putting global on everything, we need to come down a level, do our global. Okay. And then everything in here up to that and selector needs to go inside. And then our styling should come back, and that's our theme change again. And then the same with this success. So if we go to our app and we say that we want our card to be a success card. So this should have a green color on the background. It doesn't. We have scoped it. You can see there we have card success and then that little hash after it. But if we go back again to our SAS file, we have a header. This wasn't locally scoped. It doesn't understand. So again, we have to say global. And then that color now comes through. When it comes to the likes of plus and the little sideways carrots, I can't remember their names, they're totally fine. So the button here, the button's a really, really tiny component. We only have a button class name and then a type. So for this one, in this, we don't actually need to do a global, because there's kind of no point. It's just button, and then it lets us know if there's a margin left, there's a button beside it, and then we have hovers and different types. It doesn't mind the and selector when it's for hovers, but it does mind for class names. So when you have pseudos, it's totally okay. And now I can just, I think that's everything. And any questions? Sorry, I just really like that slide because of the dog.
That's awesome. Thank you very much, Vic. Yeah, so we had a question come through here on the chat, and there's a couple other ones that came through as well. So are source maps supported with CSS modules?
Do you know, I'm actually not 100% sure on that one. There's the thing with CSS modules is there's not a lot of information out there. It's a lot of playing about with it. Even that GitHub documentation page is very tiny. That global selector where you put it after and have that like umbrella effect, that was actually told to me by another engineer in Rep 7, because I couldn't find that anywhere online. That technically doesn't exist anywhere in documentation. They came out at the same time as, or like just before, styled components. So everyone jumped on styled components because they're kind of similar, but they're, you know, different implementations. So really there's not a lot of information on it. I could probably find out and get back on that.
Yeah, actually, because I seen the global selector, and even in my own, like, there's a use case I have at the minute where it's like inheriting styles from other things. I want to apply styles only to container. Like, I'm assuming the global is a CSS standard, or is it something that comes through from SAS?
Yeah, well, whenever you have it, I think when you, so I didn't have like Webpack in that demo, it was just a Create React app. I think it does local by default, unless you, and like in the Webpack example there I had, you say you want the mode to be global, in which case then it's totally fine with whatever. But again, you have to have that auto true or on, because it allows you to understand if it's a dot module, it's a dot module, it'll use that. If it's not, because I was trying to implement it in one of my projects in work, and we have our icon font, which comes through from another repo. And the icon, like I couldn't I couldn't style those up. I couldn't like go to that class and say, oh, just put like a pad and left on it. And it was because it was like, oh, but it's not a module I don't understand. And I was like, right, how do I sort this out? And that's when I found that auto true, and like that GitHub, the CSS load. I actually think I've skipped a couple on that, I think, on the presentation. The CSS loader webpack, like what is it called? On the NPM, that like documentation page, it has so much like for CSS modules and other modularized things that you can do with the CSS loader. So there's like so many, like you can completely update the class names and all that are exported out to a mad degree, but like it's so much and like the information's so little. So it's like a lot of playing around with things, you know.
So another question that came through, like one of the biggest problems with CSS in general is like unused CSS that's left over because, you know, part of the DOM's been removed and you can't really relate the two together. And I guess like, you know, the likes of like style components and other like CSS and JS libraries are kind of striving to help towards that. Maybe not the main goal. Is like it with CSS modules, do you get that same benefit? Do you have that kind of correlation?
So I'll say that, so the way that I had kind of been using it with this umbrella effect was kind of how we would normally use Sass, right? But we're just scoping it to that one component. How CSS modules should be used is kind of similar to style components in the sense that, you know, you have this like container class that goes on the container. So if the container isn't there, or like if a button isn't there, the styles don't show up. You know, and you should be putting on every single piece. I just think sometimes, depending on how big your component is, that's tedious. The only good thing I will say about CSS modules, and the only reason that I think it could be a reason for someone possibly to use it over style components, is if you already have like a large Sass library there, say you have like the way we have with all of our components in work, you know, if you're trying to move over to a more modularized approach, you don't want to have a big global Sass file where, like you say, you're pulling all this extra Sass and styling in that you're not even using. You know, you're pulling in button styling, you're not using a button. Why do you have it? It's a good way to move over quickly to that modularized approach. So it would maybe take, like, I suppose depend on your library, it could maybe take you a week or two to really just sit and go through each file and just write all those globals in, you know, and just make sure that everything's working properly, because you don't actually have to rewrite your Sass. Whereas if you're trying to write style components, you're going in, grabbing the Sass bit by bit, making a style component, making sure it sits, making sure it fits, like trying to put all these puzzle pieces together, where you don't have that with CSS modules. So I think that's the only thing that I'll say that's I think is a benefit to it.
So we just had a question come through there as well. So can you use the design tokens with CSS modules?
Yeah, I mean, I had CSS variables being used there. The CSS modules is just a way to add your CSS to your component. Anything else essentially goes. And anything you can do in Sass or you know, in the rest of your project, you can do with that.
Okay, and then we'll finish up with the last question. So like we were talking about Sass, and I think you kind of touched on some points of it during the presentation, like going from a Sass model to a CSS modules model. Is there things that like you can't, like, you know, Sass has all these like helper functions, different patterns that just don't exist in the world of CSS. Like, is there things that like, you know, you miss, or that you can't do that you wish you could be able to do?
In Sass in general?
Oh, like, because if you're moving from Sass to CSS modules, are there things that just aren't supported?
Not that I haven't seen, to be completely honest, because it's all CSS modules is all to do with the actual styles itself. So, I mean, if you have, you know, the at if, at else, if you have any of the maps or anything else that, you know, those other like functions you have in Sass, that are sort of JavaScript-y, if that's the right word, that you can use, they're all used outside of those like class name styles anyway. Like they're using another file, or they're used outside of it. So there's nothing that I've found that you know, you can still use maps and all that sort of stuff. It's just a way to literally link your class names in your JS component to the actual styles. And another thing, I guess, if you were to make like a styles.container in your card component, say, and that like container class doesn't exist in the module CSS file, it actually doesn't generate in your browser. So you're creating this JavaScript object, but it needs to have a link to even exist, or to, you know, grab any stylings. Because I actually thought that before. I was like, oh, can I just like add a bunch of class names and like nothing gets applied because there's no styles, but it's still there? No, it just comes up as an empty div.
Yeah. Okay, cool. There's a lot to think about. I need to revisit CSS modules.
Yeah, I will just
But
say it's troubling with Webpack. One
yeah.
of the reasons it was difficult for me is like the Webpack, when you're pulling it into different places, it's like, oh, the configurations, but Webpack is just Webpack in general. So
Awesome. Thank you again. Amazing talk. Well done.
no problem. Thank you. Merry Christmas.